Boy, there's a lot of headlines about Ukraine going around. And I figured I did a lot of TikToks today and the whole issue with TikTok and videos not being uploaded. I figured let's do one video kind of going through all of the news because there's so much going on. First, there's a new prime minister in the UK. Does that mean Ukraine's going to get less support? Next, we saw the sailing of Ukraine's new corvette. Is Ukraine going to use it against Russia? What's its use? How's it going to be used? Is it going to change anything? Next, we're seeing that Russia is doing a massive attack on all airfields in Ukraine. Why is that? There's just so much that's going on. So let's just quickly break it down in a video. Quickly, I mean like within maybe 15 minutes. I apologize if it's long. But for those who don't know, yesterday an official vote came through on July 4th for the UK. The main party that was in power, the Conservative Party, had to put together a vote sometime before the end of the year, and they picked July 4th. Not quite sure, but ultimately we saw Sunak call for a vote. They did a vote, and after 14 years of the Conservative Party being in power, let's just say they lost majority of that power, with the Labour Party taking the most seats. Because of that, that meant that Sunak cannot be the prime minister anymore. And so whoever was the leader of the Labour Party would then become the prime minister. And for that, let me introduce you to Keir Starmer, or Sir King Starmer. And you're probably saying, who is he? Well, he used to be a lawyer before getting into politics. And over the past few years, we've seen the Labour Party kind of grow and grow to now it having the majority. And so after Sunak went to the king and he resigned, obviously we now had Keir kind of go in. He introduced himself, even though obviously the king knew who he was, and the king asked him to form a new government, and that's what's going on. But when it comes to Ukraine, what will change? Will support for Ukraine kind of fall off? No, actually not at all. Turns out that he has always been a big supporter of Ukraine, and the Labour Party, let's just say they changed their ways a bit. I think a while back, they were not as pro kind of to foreign, but when everything in Ukraine happened, they also tried to mirror themselves to the Conservative Party just a little bit when it came to Ukraine. And their policies are pretty much the same exact policies that the Conservative Party had. So imagine that when it comes to the voting, at least when it came to power, the Conservative and Labour just have different points of view when it comes to how to run the UK. Not when it comes to foreign policy. And it does go back a little bit. Let's go back to May, to when everything was kind of ramping up to an election. When it came to his pre-election interview, we had him say, quote, "The last thing anyone in Ukraine wants to see is political parties back in the UK squabbling about something that is life or death for them." And leading into this, he also said that they had unshakable commitment to NATO and the war in Ukraine. So as you can see, it's pretty much the same thing the Conservative has. If you actually go deeper into the manifesto of what the Labour Party stands for, they're pledging a steadfast military, financial, diplomatic, and political support to Ukraine, and they're calling for a swift layout plan for Ukraine to join NATO. Now, keep in mind that NATO membership, I think if we're looking at the time frame right now, it's probably still 10 years away. I know it seems like a very long time, but keep in mind you can't have a war going on in your country and join NATO. It's just one of those things you kind of have to hang back for. So when it comes to the UK, nothing to worry about. Everything pretty much is going to stay the same. They're still going to get the support. If anything, they actually might get more because the Labour Party kind of seems more like, hey, let's just get them what they need. So maybe once they're fully in power and they get moving on Parliament, we could see more packages for Ukraine coming soon. Maybe more, long-range missiles. Just putting that out there. And while we're on the subject of long-range missiles, have you seen what Russia has been doing the past week? They've been attacking airfields left and right. Why? Because they know that as soon as F-16s get in control of Ukrainian airspace, they're not going to be able to hit certain targets. So they figured, hey, if this area is something that Ukraine could use for F-16s, airports, airstrips, and other things, let's go ahead and destroy them. And we've seen, unfortunately, a lot of Ukrainian aircraft destroyed. Now, I do need to point out, the numbers that Russia is giving when it comes to the destruction of Ukrainian aircraft this past week are skewed. At least that's what former different spokespersons for the Air Force are saying. And the numbers right now, as Russia reports, is that they had destroyed 5 Su-27s, at least 2 more had been damaged, an attack helicopter, and a MiG-29 was destroyed. Now, according to Ukrainians, I just want to read that quote from the former Air Force spokesperson who said, quote, "There are some losses, but not as many as the enemy claims. After all, they have always attacked these kinds of airfields." This one in particular was about 150 kilometers away from the front lines. Now, I have to say this with a grain of salt, because Russia did destroy aircraft, but it was because of a Ukrainian mistake. And you know as much as I do, that person is going to be fired, because how could you leave all of those Su-27s on the airfield? On top of that, Russia was able to film the entire attack. They got a drone in the sky, somehow flew it that far out, was able to relay information back to where the guys were that, hey, these aircraft are here, let's hit it, let's do this, let's do that. It was a stupid mistake on the Ukrainian side. Obviously, they're going to learn from this. But when it comes to F-16s, Russia knows it's going to be a very hard aircraft to stop. So once Ukraine gets F-16s, they'll move from, I guess, ground coverage to air support. And that air support is going to push back the Russians. And I need to talk about the rumor that's been going around. I've been reading this in a lot of Ukrainian military groups. They're saying that they think it's possible that Ukraine could be storing their F-16s not in Ukraine at all. And look, right now, we do know that Ukraine will be storing some of their F-16s in other countries. Sort of hey, we need to do maintenance on this plane, so let's swap it out with another one. And that had been confirmed. That's 100% happening. But some people believe that that is actually a misdirection and that Ukraine will be storing these aircraft outside of Ukraine. So they'll take off from those countries, do what they have to do, and then go all the way back to the other country. And there is no proof of that at this very moment. Though it is something that makes you wonder, because it's like, oh, well, that could work, because then Russia can't hit it, right? But more realistically, the other rumors we heard is that Ukraine would be using Soviet-style kind of like underground coverage and I guess, I don't know what you call them, like underground hangars in a way, which were built all the way back in the 70s and 80s. And that seems more likely. Now, obviously, we don't know where those are going to be located, but still, I think that's more likely than Ukraine having to go back and forth between another country to get jets in the sky to go do X, Y, and Z. But then again, we don't know. It's a lot of things we won't know about until the book is finally written. At the end of the day, though, what Ukraine really needs besides F-16s are Patriot systems. And today, Germany announced that their third system had been delivered into Ukraine. For the past, I think it's 4 or 5 months, a Ukrainian crew had been in Germany training on this exact system, and now Ukraine finally has it up and running, though we don't know where, which is interesting, because now people are saying, well, this had been announced around the same time the F-16s had been announced. Is it possible that this system is going to be located near the base where these F-16s will be held? And to be honest with you, that seems very likely, because this base, we would have to assume up until this point, was not protected, because Ukraine only had a couple of them, and those were in certain areas to protect civilians. But now we have to protect these F-16s, and Ukraine needed the critical infrastructure to get the permission to bring these F-16s in. And since F-16s had officially been signed off and waiting for Ukrainian delivery, I'm assuming that the last thing they needed was some kind of Patriot battery system around them to protect those planes. And like, you would have thought that maybe they would announce which city they would have been in, and they didn't, which tells me it's protecting these F-16s. But that's something that we could save for another time. Once again, when the book comes out, we'll finally learn all of this information, since most of this is just kind of guessing, since you don't want to have that information out there. And speaking of information, did you see what Russia tried to do today? Well, first and foremost, let's remind ourselves what Russia did to Mariupol. They bombed that city so many times that it's just a skeleton. Hundreds of thousands of people had been evacuated or pretty much kicked out because of what Russia did inside. They targeted every single building. They destroyed everything they could have, whether it be a little garage to a massive 10-story tower. All destroyed because Russia, well, that's what Russia does. And what Russia also does is they tried to get Russians to move into Ukrainian territories by building new buildings and showing everyone, look how great everything is. It's so wonderful. And so just this past week, Russia had Russian TV come in to film on some of the new buildings they had built. And they told them, you can only take pictures and videos from this one angle, and you can't put drones in the sky. We don't have any kind of bird point of views of what's going on, because if you look at the one little street they rebuilt, okay, first of all, in its place was like a 11-story kind of residential building. It went an entire, I think a block and a half. And they built this 4-story building for about 2 blocks. And, there's been pictures and videos of propaganda. Hey, look, come and live in Mariupol, trying to get the Russians to come move in. Well, we found out why Russia doesn't want any drone footage, because as soon as you look behind the building, you can see all of the destroyed massive residential buildings still behind them, as Russia is building essentially a fake facade of what Mariupol is and trying to convince Russians to move in, even though it is Ukrainian. That is occupied Ukraine. It is not Russian whatsoever. But Russia knows if they could just keep bussing in tons and tons and tons of Russians, and eventually when Ukraine takes it back, those Russians are going to say, oh, we live here, this is our home. It's going to cause more issues down the line. So when Ukraine does take back this city, they're going to have to kick out every single Russian in there, because first of all, the houses that were destroyed, okay, those belong to families. And so those need to be rebuilt for the families, not for Russians who came in and said, this is mine now. And second of all, Ukraine will get this territory back. And they want to send a message to any Russian that if you came here illegally, you need to leave now. And so just this photo here is just a great kind of photo to show you what Russia is. We're strong, we're this, we're that, but behind us, we're weak, we're powerless, and we live in shambles. So this is a great example of what Russia is today in 2024, which is ironic. And I say that because, have you seen what Putin said yesterday on the 4th of July? He had a meeting where he spoke to a lot of delegates and said, hey, Ukraine, that 2022, the Istanbul Agreement, is still on the table. You guys can go ahead and sign it, which is hilarious because he's referring to that contract where just a few months after Russia started their invasion of Ukraine, Russia tried to do some kind of ceasefire and treaty, which essentially would tell Ukraine, all the land that we took is now ours. You guys cannot join NATO. You have to pretty much take your military and scale it all the way down. You have to allow Russian speaking this and bring this back and do that. It was a list of demands, okay? Pretty much the same list of demands that they're making, or they made just about a month ago. And Putin is trying to tell Ukraine that that is still on the table. If they want to go ahead and sign it, go right ahead. And it's just, as I said in yesterday's video on TikTok, it's amazing how brain dead Putin is. Obviously, someone's lying to him and saying, you're winning, you're doing great, you're doing this, you're doing that. Because he's losing right now. They lost majority of the territory that they came in and conquered. Ukrainians had gotten a decent amount of it back. And at this very moment, we're at this elbow turn to where Ukraine is getting more and more ammunition. They're getting more weapons. They're about to strike into Russian territory. Soon they'll have F-16s and they'll have more Patriot batteries and more systems. So we're at the point to where Ukraine has the upper hand and will start having the upper hand every single step of the way. With Russia, keep in mind, losing thousands of men a day. I mean, if we look up the Kyiv, I'm going to look up the Kyiv Post because they have the updated numbers for today. If you look up the numbers for today, Russia lost 1,110. 10 tanks, 54 artillery, and 11 other kind of vehicles. Ukraine is getting the upper hand, and soon we'll be able to start pushing the Russians back. The reason why I bring all this up is because Orban said when it comes to peace talks, what Kyiv and Moscow have, they're very, very far apart. And he's not wrong. Ukraine has this massive plan on what to do, how to do it. They have many countries signing off on it. While at the same time, Putin and his entire peace plan is just a list of demands. Heck, it's even more than what happened in 2022. He told Ukraine that we want to take the land we took and the other territories that we're trying to take, which is like, why on earth would we do that? In a speech earlier today, Orban said that, quote, over the past 2.5 years, we've realized that we cannot achieve peace without dialogue and diplomatic channels, which he's not wrong. There needs to be open, there needs to be conversations. But he says, I felt that the positions are very far from each other, that many steps need to be taken to establish peace, but the first important step towards dialogue has already been taken. Now, that first step had been taken a while back. And with Ukraine trying to actually have a real peace formula that will not only stop Russia from what they're doing now, but stopping other countries, it's important that Russian officials finally start taking everything serious, since they are losing at this point and will be losing even worse down the line. But it also needs to be said, what Orban wants is something that I don't think is realistic, which was he wants Zelensky to go to Putin and say, hey, at this very moment, we'll do a ceasefire, and we'll give you until whatever, a month or a few weeks to have you come up with some kind of peace talk, and if we don't agree, we'll start the war again. And as Zelensky said, that's not a good idea, since you know as much as I do, Putin will just take that time to reorganize and attack even harder. And I just want to say one more thing about Orban. No one wanted him to have this whole conversation with Putin. There's not one person that said, hey, it would be a good idea if you go and sit down with Mr. Putin over there and have this kind of conversation. It should have nothing to do with Orban. It should be Ukraine and Russia. That's it. Orban has been pro-Russian this entire time. He would not be the one that would fight for Ukraine in all this matter. Okay? And remember, this is coming from the same guy who's objected to everything Ukrainian when it comes to the EU and NATO. He really does not, and that's why there's been so many tiptoes around him to kind of appease to him, to make him happy, so that, Ukraine can get things down the line. And now we're getting to the point to where they're trying to find ways to allow things to happen for Ukraine in those channels that kind of cut him out of it. So it's like he's the last person that you would want to speak to Putin about this situation. Am I right? Am I right? That being said, I got one more story for you. I know it's a lot of stories and this became a long video. Today we're seeing footage for the first time, the new Ukrainian Navy Corvette. And it looks gorgeous. They took it out today for some sea trials. You can see some video of it here. And it's performing beautifully. Someone actually was able to get drone shots of this thing. And it just looks gorgeous. Now this is Hetman Ivan Mazepa. I apologize if I'm saying it wrong. But this is a beautiful ship. A lot of people have been asking, so you're telling me this ship's going to go against Russia? No, this is not like a warship, okay? Though it does have weapons on it. It's going to be used in other military capabilities, more than likely probably patrolling and doing a few other stuff, such as maybe mining and things like that, which Ukraine's definitely going to need once Russia's invasion is over, because imagine how many thousands of mines are currently sitting in the Black Sea. But look at this ship. I honestly think it is gorgeous, and it's going to be great for Ukraine. Now, those have been all of the headlines from today. I apologize for this being a longer video. With TikTok kind of acting weird, I figured it's better just to kind of get it all out here. And then that way you can kind of understand it and maybe Google it or look up different things and get more pictures and videos. Because sometimes I can't show certain videos on TikTok because then they remove them. And I don't know why. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining me. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up.